Continued from the previous file, Literary Types, Tragedy, page 13. Effecting the reconciliation between the opposites. The greatest tragedy is the tragedy of equivalence. In bracket, Mayer's tragedy, bracket closed. Great tragedians secured equivalence of joy and sorrow, grief and gladness at the end of the tragedy, and this equivalence between the opposite feelings constitutes the pleasure of tragedy. This is represented in the agonized cry of Lear. Quote, "If it be so, it is a chance which does redeem all sorrows that ever I have felt." Unquote. In bracket, King Lear, Act 5, Scene 3, bracket closed. Aristotle's concept of catharsis has serious limitations. The pleasure of tragedy that Aristotle suggests is of a negative kind. The calm that is restored is a negative calm, a calm consisting of an escape from passion, not a positive calm experienced on its own account. Moreover, Aristotle suggests that pity and fear are aroused and then eliminated. There is a time when they remain in the mind. Their expulsion comes off at the end. It would follow from Aristotle's line of argument that the major part of the tragic experience is harrowing and dreadful. But actually, we enjoy a tragedy as we see it. Aristotle's concept has been challenged on other grounds too. Aristotle insists that pity is aroused, quote, by undeserved misfortune. If, therefore, a hero's misfortune arises from hamartia and so does not shock the moral sense as would the misfortune of the virtuous, it is not undeserved and so cannot arouse pity. If hamartia is responsible for hero's fate, there cannot be pity. Aristotle thus lands himself in inconsistency on the sole type of plot that he allows to be properly tragic. Tragedians, however, used successfully other types of plot which Aristotle rejected as unfit for tragic drama. Antigone and Cordelia are examples of virtue coming to grief and attaining tragic height. W. McNeely Dixon observes that the suffering of a blameless person is the most tragic type. Shakespeare is able to make Macbeth and Richard III tragic heroes so long as they exhibit greatness of spirit, which is the essential quality of the tragic hero. So, the pleasure of tragedy does not consist in the catharsis, restoration of calm by expelling emotions of pity and fear. Pity and fear are not the only emotions aroused by tragedy. Tragic suffering gives rise to pity and fear, and at the same time sense of glory. The hero's change of fortune, in bracket metabasis, bracket closed, resulting in his recognition and enlightenment, creates simultaneously the feelings of fear, pity and glory. These feelings of glory leads to the enlightenment of the audience. In short, enlightenment of the hero with the recognition of his folly, page 14, brings about similar enlightenment of the audience. Tragedy presents a contrast between man's worth and necessity. In Greek tragedy, the downfall of man is attributed to fate, but in modern tragedy it is ascribed to human frailty. the hero is ultimately defeated by necessity. But there is grandeur even in the apparent ignominy of this defeat. The spiritual energy exhibited by the hero in the tug of war ennobles him. He is defeated in the physical plane, but he triumphs in the spiritual plane. A tragedian, by staging this contrast between human effort and necessity, excites wonder and admiration for the spiritual potentialities of the hero. Tragic heroes, even in their downfall, learn the nature of evil and attain spiritual victory through self-knowledge. Lear attains this self-knowledge, and the tragic universe, which suffers disintegration because of his folly and ignorance, is reintegrated. It is this suggestion of the spiritual grandeur of man that gives pleasure in a tragedy. The discovery by Othello of Desdemona's unfaltering fidelity to him gladdens him, but simultaneously the sense that he has murdered his faithful wife grieves his heart. Shakespeare has achieved here a fine balancing of emotional responses by securing a harmony of the opposites. This discovery of the verity of life in the dusty din of the inevitable doom is also suggested in a modern tragedy. Mrs. Alving's in Ghosts realizes in the course of a tragic quest, quote, "I am half inclined to think we are all ghosts, Mr. Mendes," unquote. A sublime sense of resurrection of self, even in the defeat and disgrace in the material plane, is the true impression about the tragic heroes, and this is the real source of pleasure in a tragedy. Pleasure to tragedy is of a positive kind. Tragedy is a form of art, and its pleasure is an aesthetic pleasure. It is derived not from a negative attitude to evil, in bracket Hegelian optimism, bracket closed, not from the restoration of calm that is disturbed by the rousing of pity and fear, but from the appreciation of sublimity in the midst of tragic doom and destruction. In bracket, this theory of sublimity has been forcefully put forward by D. Raphael in his The Paradox of Tragedy, and by Chu Kuang-hsieh in his The Psychology of Tragedy, bracket closed. The artistic beauty of tragedy rests on the reconciliation between the opposites. Moreover, in a tragedy, pity and fear are purged of personal associations and transmuted into something universal and transcendental by the poetic art of the dramatists. What is painfully personal becomes pleasurable because the particular experience has been exalted to the universal and transcendental by the art of the tragedian. Page 15, question 5. Hamartia and hubris are terms used by Aristotle in the Poetics. Can they be applied to the protagonists of a Shakespearean tragedy? Answer. Hamartia, according to Aristotle, means error of judgment. In tragedy, the hero should be a person, quote, neither eminently virtuous or just, nor yet involved in misfortune by deliberate vice or villainy, but by some error of human frailty. Thus, a tragic hero is not wholly virtuous, because the tragedy of such a man would be shocking and disgusting. He is not wholly bad, because the tragedy of a bad man will not move us to pity and fear. His punishment will be a poetic justice. A tragic hero, therefore, is a great man with a flaw in his character. His misfortune is the result not of vice or depravity, but some error of judgment, which Aristotle called hamartia. Hamartia is an error which is derived from, quote, ignorance of some material fact or circumstance, unquote. In Greek tragedy, hubris means the pride or overweening confidence that leads the heroes to ruin. It makes the hero disregard the moral warning or divine law. Hubris provokes nemesis and Dike in bracket justice bracket close. Creon in Antigone is led by hubris and in his overconfidence bans the divine edict of burial of the dead brother Antigone. Hubris is followed by nemesis or Dike. Hamartia and hubris are related concepts. Hubris is the pride that causes the error of judgment. Tragic heroes are carried away by an overmastering passion or pride that leads them to their tragedies. Oedipus's pride is his hamartia and generates his fierce rage and obstinacy. Oedipus sets in motion the whole train of action which aims to discover the polluted person and so release Thebes from the plague. But he is ignorant of the circumstance that he has killed his own father. Thus, his hamartia is derived from ignorance of material fact or circumstance. This ignorance makes him proud and passionate, so as to be insensitive to the divine oracle that Tiresias the prophet had told him. His contempt of the prophet and his taking him to be a conspirator with Creon is the height of his pride and passion. In the cases of the tragic heroes of Shakespeare, the concepts of hamartia and hubris are applicable. Macbeth is ambitious. This is his hamartia. But this alone is not responsible for his tragedy. The victories in the battles that saved Scotland from disaster, the meeting with the witches at the psychological moment of his life, and the instigations of his ruthlessly ambitious wife aggravate his ambition. Page 16. And carry him forward to his tragic destiny, to which is impervious as he proceeds on his criminal career. Thus his error of judgment that he can secure throne and security is derived from the ignorance of material cause or circumstance and leads him to overconfidence, in bracket hubris bracket closed, which consumes his judgment. In all tragedies, the heroes are led by overweening passion, in bracket hubris bracket closed, and are blind to the consequences, or if not blind, in bracket as Macbeth bracket closed, is carried away by a force that makes him heedless to the consequences. Othello murders Desdemona in his frenzy of jealousy. King Lear divides his kingdom among his ungrateful daughters in this frenzy of egoism. Their pride and passion distort their judgment. Wisdom consumed in self-confidence. Professor Subodh Sengupta suggests that Aristotle's hamartia does not apply to Oedipus, Agamemnon, Medea, and also to Macbeth, Othello, and Hamlet. Oedipus killed his father in ignorance, not out of error of judgment. Agamemnon killed his daughter Iphigenia by divine command. Medea killed her children to take revenge on her husband. Macbeth is depraved by his ambition. Othello and Hamlet are preeminently virtuous, but their tragedy is caused by a certain quality that is a part of their nobility and not a hamartia. But hamartia, as Aristotle thinks, is this quality in the nobility of the characters. It is in the action of the drama that the hamartia or hubris have found out. Oedipus becomes more and more proud and obstinate because he is ignorant of the material cause. His obstinacy is both his hamartia and hubris. Macbeth becomes more and more ambitious and proud and is carried by an overweening passion. Othello becomes jealous and his jealousy is whetted. He cannot exercise his judgment to test what Iago insinuates against Desdemona. King Lear's judgment is so vitiated by his egoism that he cannot distinguish between his wicked daughters and his loving daughter. The errors are generated by this pride and passion, which intensify as the action proceeds, resulting in the tragic disasters for the heroes. Question 6. Is modern tragedy a contradiction in terms? Substantiate your answer. Answer. Tragedy is of Greek origin and is therefore traditional and ancient. But tragedy is written in modern times. There is no contradiction between tragedy and modernity. It is, however, true that tragedy in modern times has come a long way from what Greeks wrote and Aristotle theorized. Modern drama is eclectic and experimental. It is no longer possible to keep the old distinction, page 17, between tragedy and comedy, a distinction which has always been an unreal one. John Osborne's Look Back in Anger, first staged in 1956, marked a new age in English drama. It introduced a new kind of drama to the English stage. It is a comedy, but Osborne depicts a savagely naturalistic picture of maladjusted contemporaries. The subject of the play is the hidden class war between those who have grown up in comfortable bourgeois homes and those have fought their way up the social stairs by their own intelligence. It underlines the conflict between a young man and his wife, a girl of higher social class, who is unable to understand his anger and frustration. It is tragic in its note of bitterness, disillusionment, and anger, which are exhibited all through the play. But it ends in reunion between husband and wife because they have no other shelter to go and find happiness. They are reunited in disillusionment. In Arnold Whisker's Chicken Soup with Barley, there is the sense of wretchedness of human beings who seek satisfactory living. In the play's last verse, Sarah urges on her son Ronnie the need to care about what happens to himself and to others. The need not only to face disillusion, but to see it as irrelevant if one is to go or as a human being. Harold Pinter's The Caretaker shows life as comic absurdity. Its setting is a room in an otherwise empty house, a room filled with an accumulation of rubbish amassed over the years, whose ceiling leaks, whose ownership is claimed by each of two brothers, a room where we find love and pity, cruelty and a forlorn solitude. We are often puzzled by the things that happen there, but we have a sense that they correspond to things that do happen in our world. Samuel Beckett's Waiting for Godot concentrates on portraying the hopeless condition of mankind by means of absurd happenings. The scene is a wasteland with the remnant of a tree. The two tramps wait in the wasteland for an unidentified person, Godot, who may or may not exist. Quote, "Nothing happens, nobody comes, nobody goes, it's awful." Unquote. It is grotesquely comic, yet it has a tragic undernote as it depicts the absurd condition of man. Thus, in modern drama, the distinction between tragedy and comedy is blurred. Waiting for Godot is a tragic-comic allegory of what the existentialists call delisement. Chekhov's drama, in bracket Russian dramatists, bracket closed, are essentially tragic, but they have comic and ironic overtones. In Cherry Orchard, he remarkably combines the humor and tragedy of human situation, tragic ineffectuality. In the early 20th century, Ibsen, the Norwegian dramatist, influenced English drama. His dramas are tragic. He discusses, page 18, the modern problems and predicaments of human existence. A Doll's House deals with husband-wife relationship. It shows the tragedy of a woman who is a doll, first in the hands of her father and secondly in the hands of her husband. She leaves the house of her husband in realization of her complete ineffectuality as a human being. It is not a tragedy in the traditional sense. In Ghosts, the father's sin is visited on the son. It is a tragedy derived from heredity. Shaw's St. John is based on the debate between Catholicism and individualism. Galsworthy's plays dramatize the clash between men and modern social forces. Falder in Justice is caught in the toils of law, which does not take into consideration human aspects of a crime. In Strife, the conflict between Anthony and Robert is keyed to a high pitch and ends in the tragic waste of Robert's wife. Modern tragedy deals with ordinary men and women in ordinary circumstances of life. The heroes of modern tragedy struggle against the social forces. They cannot offer any heroic resistance to the forces arrayed against them, as do Oedipus, Macbeth, and Lear. There is the sorriness of things, but not the grandeur that is associated with the classical and Shakespearean tragedies. Synge's one-act tragedy, Riders to the Sea, deals with common men and women of Aran Islands who have to carry on relentless and ineffectual conflict with the sea. But Moria, the heroine, attains greatness of spirit in her utter loneliness. A new enlightenment and graciousness inform her being. Here, a traditional tragedy is created in the modern context and setting. Modern tragedies are thus different from Greek tragedies and Shakespearean tragedies. They are the products of tension and anxiety peculiar to the age. The spirit of tragedy has to fit in with the ethos of the age. Question 7. A story of exceptional calamity is leading to the death of a man in high estate. Can this definition be applied to modern tragedy? Give reasons for your answer. Answer. Modern tragedy does not deal with men of high position and status. The heroes of modern tragedy are not princes, potentates, and generals. Oedipus, Agamemnon, King Lear, or Prince Hamlet no longer occupy the stage as heroes. They are men of exceptional powers and possibilities, and they offer heroic resistance to the forces arrayed against them. Their titanic contests with the adverse forces generate the feelings of pity, fear, and admiration. They are defeated in the physical plane, but they are victorious in the spiritual plane. Their deaths produce sorriness and at the same time grandeur. Continued in the next file.